I used to think disappointment arrived all at once, like bad news delivered in a single sentence. But what I've learned is that it comes quietly, stretched out over years, until one day you realize you've been grieving something that never actually happened. My name is Joel, and I'm 55 years old. And for most of my life, I was living toward a version of myself that never arrived, convinced that one day, things would finally line up the way I imagined they were supposed to. When I was younger, I carried a very clear picture of how my life would look. Not in detail, not like a movie scene with exact dialogue, but in feeling. I imagined confidence, ease, a sense that I had made the right turns. I believed there would come a moment when I'd look around and think, yes, this is it. This is what all that effort was for. I didn't say this out loud back then, but deep down I was certain that if I worked hard enough and stayed disciplined enough, life would eventually reward me with clarity and peace. In my 20s, that belief felt reasonable. Everyone around me was imagining futures that hadn't happened yet, and nobody had enough evidence to doubt themselves. We were all in motion, and motion itself felt like progress. I told myself that confusion was temporary, that uncertainty was part of the process, and that the real story hadn't started yet. I was patient with my life in those years, because I believed patience would be repaid. By my 30s, the picture was still intact, but it had started to blur at the edges. Some of the people I thought I'd grow old with drifted away. Some choices I assumed were reversible quietly locked themselves in place. I told myself it was normal, that everyone adjusted their expectations, that this was just the middle part before things made sense. I didn't feel alarmed yet, just mildly disappointed in ways I didn't know how to name. In my 40s, the gap between the life I imagined and the one I was living became harder to ignore. I had a job that paid the bills, but didn't light anything up inside me. I had relationships that were stable, but strangely distant, like we were all playing our roles correctly, without ever checking if the script still fit. I had routines, responsibilities, and a calendar that stayed full, yet I often felt like I was watching my own life from a few steps behind. Still, I held on. I told myself that this was just the long middle stretch, that meaning often arrives late, that plenty of people don't find their footing until their 50s or 60s. I clung to stories about late bloomers and sudden breakthroughs. I told myself I was being realistic. But looking back, I can see I was also afraid. Afraid to admit that the life I was waiting for might not be coming. What no one really tells you is that disappointment doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it just feels like low-level exhaustion. It feels like waking up and immediately thinking about what needs to be done instead of what you're excited about. It feels like going through the motions competently but without joy. It feels like telling yourself you're lucky while quietly wondering why gratitude feels forced. I didn't have a breakdown. There was no single day where everything collapsed. Instead, there was a slow accumulation of moments that didn't quite land the way I thought they would. Promotions that felt underwhelming. Milestones that passed without the satisfaction I expected. Conversations where I nodded along while thinking, is this really it? The turning point, if I can call it that, came in an ordinary moment. I was alone in my kitchen late one evening, rinsing a mug before bed. The house was quiet in that particular way it gets when you realize most of your days are now behind you, rather than ahead. I caught my reflection in the dark window, not sharply, just enough to recognize myself. And something in me settled in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was recognition. I saw a man who had done what he knew how to do, who had tried to be responsible, reliable, decent. And I realized that I had been measuring my life against an imagined version that had never faced the constraints I faced, never made the compromises I had to make, never lived inside my actual circumstances. I had been judging myself against a fantasy that didn't have to deal with reality. That night, I didn't feel like I had failed. I felt like I had finally stopped arguing with the facts. I saw clearly that the life I imagined was built on assumptions I made when I didn't yet understand how complicated things become. I imagined unlimited energy, clear choices, perfect timing. I imagined relationships without erosion, work without trade-offs, purpose without doubt. I imagined a world that didn't exist. As that realization settled in, something unexpected happened. I felt a small sense of relief. Not happiness, not triumph, but relief. It was the feeling you get when you finally stop holding your breath without realizing you were doing it. For years, I had been living as if my real life was a placeholder, something temporary until the meaningful version arrived. And in doing that, I had missed large parts of the life that was actually happening. I started noticing how often I dismissed my own experiences because they didn't match my expectations. I overlooked moments of connection because they didn't feel profound enough. I undervalued stability because it didn't feel exciting. I ignored quiet contentment because it didn't resemble the fulfillment I had imagined in my youth. I was so focused on what was missing that I failed to see what had endured. There were losses I hadn't allowed myself to grieve properly because acknowledging them felt like admitting defeat. Dreams I kept half alive in my mind, not because I planned to pursue them, but because letting them go felt like giving up on myself. I didn't realize how much energy it took to maintain that internal resistance, to keep telling myself that this wasn't the real story yet. Accepting the life I was given didn't happen in a single decision. It unfolded gradually, through smaller acts of honesty. I started admitting to myself when something wasn't working, instead of insisting it would eventually make sense. I stopped framing every compromise as temporary. I allowed certain doors to close without immediately searching for replacements. One of the hardest things was accepting that some versions of myself would never exist. Not because I wasn't capable, but because life had already moved in other directions. I had to mourn that quietly. There's no ceremony for that kind of loss. No one sends condolences when you let go of who you thought you'd be. But it's a real grief, and it deserves to be acknowledged. As I let go of that imagined life, I noticed how my relationship with time began to change. I stopped rushing through days in anticipation of some future payoff. I became more present. Not in a dramatic way, but in a grounded one. I paid attention to conversations instead of rehearsing what I'd say next. I noticed the comfort of familiarity instead of resenting it. I found myself less angry at how things turned out. I also became more compassionate toward my younger self. I used to judge him for being naive, for not planning better, for wanting things that didn't align with reality. But now, I see that he was doing the best he could with limited information. He didn't know what he didn't know. None of us do at that age. Expecting him to have gotten it right feels unfair in hindsight. There were still regrets, of course. Accepting your life doesn't erase them, but they changed shape. They became less accusatory, less sharp. Instead of asking, why didn't I do this, or why didn't I become that, I started asking gentler questions. What did I learn? What did I carry forward? What did I survive? I noticed that once I stopped fighting my reality, I had more energy to engage with it. I became more patient with people, including myself. I stopped needing every decision to justify my past or secure my future. I focused more on what felt honest in the present. That shift didn't make life easier, but it made it quieter inside. One thing that surprised me was how acceptance didn't feel like settling. I had always associated acceptance with resignation, with lowering standards, with giving up on growth. But what I found was different. Acceptance didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I stopped pretending that my worth depended on an outcome I could no longer control. I began redefining success in smaller, more personal terms. Showing up consistently. Being kind without keeping score. Letting relationships be imperfect without seeing that as failure. Finding satisfaction in competence rather than recognition. These weren't ideas I would have found inspiring in my 20s, but they felt deeply grounding now. There's a particular humility that comes with realizing you are not an unfinished version of someone else. You are a complete version of yourself, shaped by choices, limitations, chance, and time. Once I accepted that, I stopped feeling like I was constantly behind. I was simply where I was. If you're younger than me and listening to this, I'm not saying you should abandon your dreams or lower your hopes. Ambition has its place. Vision matters. But I am saying this: don't postpone your life while waiting for it to become something else. Don't treat your present as a rehearsal for a future that may never arrive.
And if you're around my age or older, feeling that quiet ache of comparison between what is and what you thought would be, I want you to know that you're not alone in that. Many of us carry that ache silently, assuming it's a personal failure rather than a shared human experience. It doesn't mean you wasted your life. It means you lived in a world that didn't always cooperate with your plans.
At 55, I haven't figured everything out. I still have days where disappointment sneaks back in, where old expectations resurface. But now, when they do, I recognize them for what they are. Ghosts of imagined futures that no longer need my attention. The life I was given may not match the one I imagined, but it is real, and it is mine. And for the first time in a long while, I'm no longer waiting for it to begin.